People thought it would be Alabama, Texas A&M as the SEC game of the year, but no, it's actually this week. Alabama, Ole Miss, taking place on Saturday. 2:30 p.m. Central Time kickoff from Bryant-Denny Stadium. CBS will have the call on the matchup. We're back at it again, people. Touchdown, Alabama Magazine, providing you all of your updates on your Crimson Tide. I'm yours truly, Stephen M. Smith.
And I'm Patrick Dowd.
And we're going to get into these updates for you right now, getting you closer and closer to the matchup between Crimson Tide and Ole Miss. Pat, first and foremost, Coach Saban mentioned Brian Robinson team really hopeful for senior running back goals this week. He had a very good week of practice, did all he was asked to do, looked strong, looked clean, looked smooth, going through practice, going through drills. So it seems like B-Rob's going to be back on the field this week after having last week off to rest versus Southern Miss.
Yeah, and this is a big boost for Alabama's backfield because they played excellent last week against Southern Miss. Two guys almost running for over 100 yards, and they throw in Brian Robinson into the mix, who's still the team's leading rusher despite missing last week's game. So that now all of a sudden Alabama has a triple threat out of its backfield.
Alabama hoping to run the football, get that offensive line to flex some muscle here, because in this matchup against Ole Miss, I think whoever can establish this run game and establish it consistently going to play a huge factor here. But defensively, Pat, LeBron Ray, Coach Saban also talking about him. The team very pleased with his progress. He continues to grow, continues to get stronger, coming back from the groin surgery. We saw him last week against the Golden Eagles. He did have a quarterback hurry, was able to get some pressure there in the backfield. Just so good to see a young man that's been through so many injuries continuing to fight, continuing to battle, and just continuing to play football.
Yeah, it really is good to see him back on the field. I think it's important for him and fans to realize he doesn't have to be this big-time defensive lineman.
Right,
he just needs to come in and make a small impact here and there. Because
put something on tape.
Well, yeah, put something on tape, but anything that they can give him is just a plus for this Alabama defensive line that is really, really deep on the inside.
And people have been talking about this prior to the season, Pat, about Alabama rotating 7, 8, 9, 10 guys deep. We've been wondering where are the rest of these guys on the field. So it was good to see Brian Ray get out there, guys like Byron Young, guys like Stephon Wynn, Jamil Burrows, and things of that nature. But now we look at here, Pat, this is the matchup people have been talking about all week. Alabama, Ole Miss. The storylines, Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban, the once odd couple together on the same sideline going against each other for a second straight year, this time in Tuscaloosa. This will be the first time Kiffin returns to Bryant-Denny Stadium since he was the offensive coordinator for the Tide from 2014 to 2016. But talking about Ole Miss's defense first, people put so much stock in the Rebel offense, and I get it. When you have Lane Kiffin, when you have Jeff Lebby, when you have Matt Corral and the weapons that they do, quite naturally, the offense gets praised. But DJ Durkin, as the co-defensive coordinator, he's got this group looking very much so improved in all three phases.
Yeah, last year was terrible defensively. The only way you can go is up, and even then, the narrative that Ole Miss's defense is rejuvenated and back, I think it's a bunch of BS. Because last year, Ole Miss averaged allowed 519 yards per game. This year, they're around 345. That's a little bit smoke and mirrors because who have they played? Louisville in a neutral site game, Austin Peay, and Tulane at home. As much as people wanted to pump up Tulane because, practice in Alabama's facilities gave Oklahoma a close game, they might be trying to punch in the SEC. I'm not really buying it. Also, another thing that you got to realize going into this game, the defense is wildly undisciplined. They're number one in the SEC, and this is a bad number one to have. They're number one in the SEC in first downs allowed by penalties with 3.7 per game. That's that. If you can't be going on the road into this huge game, this is their first road game of the year, and against the number one team in the country, you can't let Alabama's offense get 3 or 4 extra opportunities at drives. So, as much as the raw stats, just yards, points per game, they look better. But when you really actually look at it, it's not against ideal competition. So I think Alabama, regardless, is going to be able to move the ball and have a lot of success on this defense.
Pat Dowd going behind the numbers here, people, when you talk about this Ole Miss defense. Now, yet they do have some guys, though. They do have some talent. Sam Williams, an outside linebacker. He's got 14 career sacks, 4 of those this season. But this is going to be a huge game for me when you look at this Alabama offensive line for this group. In particular, the offensive guards, Emil Ekiyor Jr. and Javion Cohen. We saw Cohen grow up a little bit last week against Southern Miss. He got beat a couple of times, got back up, held his ground, made plays, not only opening up the run game, but protecting Bryce Young. We saw Emil Ekiyor against Florida. Did some pretty good things, sealing off Jeremiah Moon, giving Bryce Young an opportunity to go through the progressions and making those passes. But I feel like both guards this week, another game for Ekiyor, another game for Javion Cohen to continue to grow. Because even though Ole Miss may not have the big numbers, Durkin in this group, they're going to bring pressure. The guards, big game for Ekiyor and Cohen.
Yeah, it's going to be a big game for the offensive line. And Nick Saban had mentioned they run a lot of Iowa State's defensive front, 8-man drop. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the run game with a three lineman front like that if they're dropping 8 players. So, I mean, the draw play is going to be huge for them, and the play action game is going to be big as well. So it's just going to be a big opportunity for this offensive line to really control the line of scrimmage, because you're going to need to in order to win this game against this Ole Miss offense, you're going to need to win the time of possession.
Absolutely. Now, Pat, the big player here that can have just a monster performance, Jaleel Billingsley.
Yep.
Jaleel, who is free. He is out of a doghouse. He is playing. Had 5 catches last week, 106 yards, 1 touchdown. When you have a tight end that's 6'4", 230, runs routes like a receiver, but the physicality is a mismatch against cornerbacks and safeties, this could be the first game where we see Jaleel Billingsley stake his claim as a first-round pick. In years past, Alabama has held its tight ends for the marquee matchups, i.e. O.J. Howard back in the day here in the early against Alabama.
And Kiffin knows him well.
And Kiffin knows O.J. Howard very well. But here's a situation where Jaleel Billingsley could have a monster performance.
I mean, he had a monster performance last week. He had over 100 yards in his first full game back. But, I understand what you're saying, though. This is the first Alabama, Ole Miss, big-time ranked matchup at home. It's the first big game they've had since probably 2019 when LSU came to town. And this is the big opportunity for the crowd to be involved in the game as well. Just it's a big stage for Billingsley to be able to show out and just show that he's, like you said, a first round pick.
Billingsley looking to have a big game. Bryce Young, this is a huge opportunity for him as well. He and Matt Corral in the center of his Heisman talk, the center of his Heisman conversation. But as we now look at Pat, kind of the Alabama defense, the message all week, whether it's been Fidarian Mathis, Henry To'o, Jordan Battle, who they let back in to do press conferences after his comments in a recent press conference, Jordan Battle back in. But the conversation has been, we got to have the Bama mentality. We got to have the Bama standard. And whether that be in play relentless, whether that be play with passion, play with focus, play with discipline, we got to have it this week. What are you looking forward to seeing, Pat, from this defense that all week they've heard, well, Ole Miss scored 48 on you last year. Well, Ole Miss had 630 yards of offense on you last year. What are you looking forward to seeing from this group, Pat, on Saturday?
Well, I'm not looking to see a shutout because I think that's just impossible. I mean, because the way college football is played now, I think we've been over this for months now. You're not shutting out anybody these days, especially Ole Miss. But, just a couple key stops here and there just to get them out on third down. You only really need to stop them a handful of times because of Ole Miss's defense and Alabama's ability is going to be able to move the ball offensively, I believe. So it's just a couple key stops is what I'm looking for. Just show some resiliency on the defensive side of the ball. I know last year that it didn't really – they didn't get too many stops. They forced them to a big field goal near the end of the game, which proved to be the difference. So it's just all this game's going to take is a handful of stops to make the difference.
Handful of stops and maybe a critical turnover or two at the right moment. So for this Alabama defense, handful of stops, maybe a turnover or two. I mean, the main thing, not having the penalties, because you mentioned about Ole Miss. For Alabama, when you're facing an Ole Miss offense that thrives off speed, high tempo, up tempo, running a whole bunch of plays, and how many plays you can get out in a period of time, you cannot have those penalties aiding this Ole Miss offense. So we're looking forward to seeing what this defense does. It's had a great week of practice. They put a game plan together. They've heard it all week. Can this Alabama defense limit, neutralize, do something against Lane Kiffin and this offense? It's going to be fun to watch that this week. But Pat, I also got to bring up this. Special teams could play a role in this game.
Yeah.
Ole Miss typically keeps a really good punter. They got a guy this year that's averaging 48.4 yards per punt. They got a really good kickoff specialist as well. But just seeing Jamison Williams last week, 2 kick return touchdowns, and been watching the growth of JoJo Earl on punt return. Special teams creating that field position and setting the opponent in unfavorable field position could be a huge component this week.
Absolutely. I mean, the less amount of yards Alabama's offense has to move the football, the better. I mean, field position could be huge. If Jamison Williams runs it back for down to the Ole Miss 20, he
already saying I want to take it back to the crib every time.
He already did it twice last week, and I think it's going to be a huge factor in the game. And Will Riker too, his consistency in the kicking game, a field goal before the half could make a huge difference for the offense.
Also, James Burnap, young man from Australia. You had a good week punting against Southern Miss. Now he faces Ole Miss. Funny story, Burnap was actually committed to Ole Miss before flipping to Alabama. So could be a huge matchup here for James Burnap in terms of the punting aspect. But as we now look at just the players in this game, it's a marquee matchup. People could talk about, the Nick Saban, Lane Kiffin storyline. It's going to be a storyline that will be brought up throughout the entire game. But the players are the ones that get this done on the field. Pat, who will your eyes be on inside Bryant-Denny?
Henry Toto, because he was talking this week about how he wants to the things he wants to improve on since his 4 games here at Alabama, and one of the things was communication and delivering the play efficiently to the line. Sometimes it takes a little too long to get the play to the rest of the defense, which causes some lapses here and there. And that's going to be very important to nail down this week against Ole Miss, especially with their tempo, getting the play called to the rest of the defense efficiently, getting the guys in order, because that is going to be integral for the defense to get Ole Miss's offense slowed down.
You got a defensive guy, Pat. I'm going to go with the defensive guy myself. My guy is Christian Harris. Christian Harris, prior to the start of the season, many people were looking at him as a middle first-round pick, maybe a top 15 guy. Has not played like it at this point, has been lost at times on the field. This is a game where Christian Harris can get himself back right at that weak side backer position, going sideline to sideline, cracking down on plays, making some big contributions out here on the field. Definitely looking forward to seeing To'o not just make the calls, but have himself lined up ready to go, and Christian Harris as well. But the line on this game, Pat, has been crazy. It's been 14.5, 15.5. I think the over-under is, 79 in terms of points. It's been a madhouse when you look at what Vegas is trying to do and trying to see which team has this edge here in this matchup. Pat, do you see the spread being covered? Do you see the over-under being covered? Where is your mind at on this?
Well, I mean, typically the consensus seems to be that this is going to be a close game. If I'm a bet man, I'm going against the grain. I'm saying Alabama covers 14.5, but that's just me. Everyone's saying that it's going to hit the over. I'm hitting the under. That's just me as a betting man. I think Alabama will win this game, though. And it might be by 10 points, might be by 17, but, I think they will come out.
I think Alabama wins this game. I think they don't cover the spread. I think Bama by 10. I go with Bama by 10. I think Ole Miss is going to make this really interesting. I think Alabama's defense gets a critical turnover in the fourth quarter. That'll be a huge stop. I think Bryce Young plays well. I think Jaleel Billingsley steps up, has a huge game. Alabama's defense will be able to get some pressure, but I do see in the fourth quarter a critical turnover for the Tides defense. I got Bama by 10 here in this matchup. But folks, on Saturday, Alabama, Ole Miss, Bryant-Denny Stadium, 2:30 p.m. Central Time kickoff. Nick Saban, Lane Kiffin, big matchup here in the SEC with a lot on the line early in this college football season. For all of us here at Touchdown Alabama Magazine, providing your Crimson Tide news, I'm Stephen M. Smith.
And I'm Patrick Dowd.
And baby, we'll check you guys out next week.